Hey everyone, Desi's here with another video. Today I'm going to be doing another book review on Brandon Sanderson's first Mistborn book. It's also kind of known as the Final Empire as its title, but it's a part of the trilogy of the Mistborn series. And somewhat of a preface, this is my first Brandon Sanderson book that I have read. I've heard a lot of good things about Brandon Sanderson. I recently finished George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series, so I've kind of been itching to kind of delve more into other fantasy books and learn about new characters, especially worlds and settings that I don't have any prior knowledge of. When it came to A Song of Ice and Fire, I already had a lot of information from the show regarding the world itself and all of the characters. Although there were some nuances and differences which I really enjoyed, I was looking forward to reading a series where I had no frame of reference about what was going to happen, what any of the characters' motivations were. So kind of starting Mistborn as my first series after that, I think was pretty fun. And another big thing I want to talk about is Brandon Sanderson's writing style and how he writes his prose. I think, and he's mentioned this in his own kind of words, I think he writes pretty simplistically, in the way that you can visualize what's going on pretty simply, and the dialogue of the characters themselves are probably the best part of the book. Just the way the characters communicate with each other, you can really see the thought put into their chemistry and dynamics, and how that furthers the plot and how it furthers the characters' own developments. And big examples of this are, Kelsier and Vin. They're the highlights of the book. And another thing I want to mention before I kind of get into too much of the book is this is going to be mostly a spoiler review. I might start off talking about some of the vague information regarding the book itself, but I'm going to jump into spoilers fairly quick. So if you haven't read the book yet, I highly recommend it. I think it's a really good book. That's my review right there. I think it's a fun book, a fun series so far. And if you haven't read it yet, go ahead and read it. If you've never read Brandon Sanderson, I think you should give it a shot, because so far I'm really enjoying his writing style. Kind of going from A Song of Ice and Fire with George R.R. Martin, the way he writes his books, it's very much like an abstract art piece, I would say. It's very slow and it's very methodical in the way that it brings about just the scope of the world and the characters, and it's very rough and it's very nuanced, and it's like you're thrown into this very harsh world. And I think the world of Mistborn is very similar to that. It's very dark, it's very, it's grim, and there's a lot of suffering and a lot of tragedy. But the way Brandon Sanderson writes it is a bit different, because I think he just writes it just very straightforward, and I think it makes it very accessible to read personally. And I think he puts a lot of logic into the way he writes. He talks things out a lot, and especially when it goes into the thoughts of the characters themselves, if you're reading in their perspective, there's a lot of problem solving and breaking apart the situation. And I think that helps readers kind of understand the dynamics of the situation in, kind of a straightforward way of kind of showcasing to the reader, this is what's going on, why is this happening, why is this not happening. You kind of get the sense of that right away. And I think it still does bring room, though, to kind of have your own interpretations of it at the same time. But I think a little bit less than how George R.R. Martin would have for the way he writes, where he's not really trying to answer any questions. He's not really even trying to ask the questions. I think all of that is up to the reader themselves when they read the book. But enough of George R.R. Martin. I think it's easy for me to compare, since that was the last series I read. I think Brandon Sanderson's writing is very, very good and very enjoyable, and it's very fun. And I think there's a lot to get out of it, just for entertainment itself, and just understanding, I like to read fiction to kind of understand the minds of other people and what makes them go, what makes them, the human condition within other people and their motivations and everything. I really like that about fiction, And I like learning about myself when I read fiction. That's kind of my own personal enjoyment from reading. I like to kind of see it as a way for me to kind of build myself and view myself in different perspectives, while also kind of just enjoying the world that other fantasy books kind of bring to the table. And Mistborn, the setting is very unique. It is within the political hierarchy of the Final Empire, which is ruled by the Lord Ruler, this immortal, omnipotent being who has total control over everything and everyone, and he's ultra powerful, and he is talked about all throughout the novel. He's eventually revealed near the end of the novel, just his character actually showing up and being present. And I think it was really fun because they were putting a lot of weight into the Lord Ruler and his inevitable entrance in the book. And so when he did show up, it felt like an oh shit moment. Like, oh, this is the Lord Ruler. This, like, when I was reading those pages, it felt real. Like, I felt gravity when I was reading that. And I think that's always a fun thing to have when you read a book, is to feel that weight of a character. And just to kind of go over some of the characters too, the first thing that I kind of enjoyed about Mistborn was the character dynamics and kind of the lighthearted nature of the characters in the book. Going from a Song of Ice and Fire, I'll mention, one more time, it's very serious and very dark and, yeah, pretty messed up. And Mistborn, it still has that kind of dark side to it, but the characters have light and they have levity. They're funny. They have witty banter and a lot of it. And I really enjoyed that when I first read the book. Highlights of this were not Dachshund. He was okay. I think he was one of the less funny guys, but Ham and Breeze were like my favorite duo. Just kind of their back and forth banter about Ham always kind of bringing up philosophical questions and Breeze always being annoyed by it. And just kind of Kelsier's upbeat personality, but he's really kind of a ruthless person who's fueled by somewhat revenge and kind of also avenge for his wife that got killed. And I really did enjoy Kelsier. He was probably the character that I gravitated to the most, and that's probably because he is more of the mentor character. And I think in these kind of trilogies, I think the audience usually kind of tends to pay more attention to the mentors because there's kind of a gravity of wisdom to those characters and what they provide to the story. Our main character is Vin, who is a 15 or 16-year-old girl who grew up very poor with her abusive older brother, and they had to kind of move between places and survive and become thieves, ska thieves, scavenging and, being beaten. And she had a very traumatic past, and it's very evident in Vin's inner monologue and how she views other people. And that's something that is very interesting to see unfold throughout the series, let alone the first book, because Vin is one of the characters that we see develop the most on a power level. Allomancy is one of the big power magic systems in this book, which is the ability to kind of control metal and also control emotions and kind of strengthen your body and see into the future and see what other people are going to do in seconds time, what they would do in a fight. There's a lot of nuance to it, and I really caught up to the system pretty quick. The way Brandon Sanderson explains it and introduces it is very straightforward. And one thing I really liked about it was that it introduced allomancy through Kelsier's perspective, basically not really introducing what anything meant, just kind of throwing you into the deep end to kind of show you just a day in the life of a Mistborn allomancer, what they're going to be doing. This is when he breaks into Keep Hastings, I think, or Keep Venture or something like that, and he steals a safe full of atium crystals, which is geodes, which are a very, very valuable allomancer resource because that is the metal that allows you to see into the future. And it's pretty badass. And it really just jumps into this whole action scene with Kelsier. So it's like, okay, like I'm reading this, I don't really understand everything that it's saying because there's pushing, pulling, and they're capitalized, and it's like, okay, trying to keep up, like I can kind of see what's going on here. And then afterwards, when Kelsier is training Vin, who is also a Mistborn, how to, use the allomantic abilities, it's then starts to drip feed you what you already kind of read in that previous passage with Kelsier kind of heisting on this place. And I thought that was pretty creative. I really like that. And I think it gives the reader a good perspective when it comes to seeing what something could become without even understanding what it is first. And then when you do understand what it is, it makes you reflect back on what was already introduced with a different perspective. So when it inevitably kind of happens again in a similar light, you're more prepared and you're more versed with the story. And as someone inspired by, authors, fantasy authors and stuff, that I'm kind of, I have a inspiration to write my own fantasy novel. I definitely can take from that for my own story, because I think it really has an effective payoff as a reader. And just other characters, there's Inquisitors, which are kind of like the big supernatural bad guy besides the Lord Ruler. So they're literally like these mutant allomancers that have nails drilled into their eyes. So they literally don't have eyes. They just have like nails sticking out of their eyes and sticking out the back of their head. And they're just ultra powerful. And they're pretty scary in the book. Like when they're very aware. They can like track allomancers and they can sense when anyone else is using a metal. And that kind of brings me into kind of the hierarchy of this aristocracy in the book itself. The highest is the Lord Ruler. Then there's the noblemen, like the upper noblemen, like lower noblemen. Then there's the Ska, which are like a slave race that are unpaid workers. And there's thieves within the Ska. There's just, common day blue collar workers that are like at the mills and stuff. And there's plantations all throughout the empire that are ruled by like noblemen that are lords under the Lord Ruler. And there's a big, systemic imbalance between these groups of people in the story. And the big premise, I guess I should talk about what this story is even about, is that Kelsier kind of gets a band of goons, a band of like Ska and noblemen, kind of fake noblemen, Ska people, and they're going to heist the Lord Ruler and steal his riches to give back to the Ska and try to override the final empire, try to take it over. And I wonder if they succeed in that. They do. Spoiler alert, they succeed. They take over the final empire. And that's why Mistborn itself is a really good novel on its own, because it has a beginning and a conclusion that resolves the big threat. And they eventually kill the Lord Ruler. Spoiler alert. They kill the Lord Ruler. Kelsier dies before that even happens, which is a big like, oh shit, Kelsier's dead. So there's this big upheaval, and the Ska are starting to look to Kelsier as a religious figure. So it kind of shows how religions are formed and how power is, taken over, and where power even stands, what it even means, without the guise of a supernatural omnipotent power. And I think it's really fun to read a story like that. And I guess moving on from that point, like just taking out the Lord Ruler, the big final thread that's left unknit, something like that, is that the Lord Ruler's like, hey, I've been saving your asses. You guys are screwed now that I'm dead. And that's kind of his last words to Vin before she stabs him in the heart with a spear. And so it leaves Vin like conflicted, like, wait, did I kill the good guy? Is the Lord Ruler a good guy? Or is he actually protecting us? Like, what's going on here? And the next two novels, The Well of Ascension's the second one. I finished that one a week or two ago, and I'm almost done with the third one. So I'm going to do a full trilogy review of these books and what I think. But that's kind of the big plot point of Mistborn. How it ends off is very open-ended. What was the Lord Ruler up to? There's probably more going on than what we initially thought. What was the final empire even about? Like, what is this whole world? The scope of the world, the setting itself is insane. There's volcanoes that permanently emit ash, and ash is always falling, and there's always clouds and mist covering the skies. The sun is literally red because of all of the mist and all of the clouds that are covering the sky with the ash. Like, the sun is literally red. The world is red. All of the plants, all of the trees, there's no green at all. They're all like brown and yellow. It is a completely different world to visualize than, the world we live in today. And I think that makes it all the more fun to visualize these scenarios because it's all under the scope of this completely dystopian ecological world that's completely flipped upside down and in a very unhealthy state. And, there's constantly ash on the ground. And yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's very, very unique for that. And I really appreciated that when I read the book, that they're literally in a red world. And yeah, it adds another weight to the story. And all in all, I read this book. I got like the small print copy, and it was about 650 pages or so. But the read was very quick. The writing is very digestible, and I think it was very, very engaging and entertaining. I think I read the book in maybe a little under 2 weeks because it was just pretty damn good. And I read the second one right away, which I'm going to do another review on. But yeah, Mistborn is a really good book by Brandon Sanderson. I'm planning on reading the Stormlight Archive after. And I also want to read the Harry Potter books too, so I might be doing some reviews on those books, a part of the series. So I'm looking forward to that, but I wanted to get some of my words out about the first Mistborn book before it was too late, because I finished it, almost a month ago, so I want to make this review while it's still somewhat fresh in my mind, while I'm at least still reading the trilogy itself. So anyways, if you read Mistborn, I'd love to hear what you thought about it. Did you like the book? Did you maybe not like it so much? I know there was some parts that I didn't like too much. I think some of the writing when it came to like the court scenes with Elend, I think Elend was a really interesting character, but I think some of the romance parts of the book were a little they didn't really feel like they fit in with the story too much. And I think that's more of a biased perspective that I have. I've never been a big romance book reader, and so that's probably my own bias why I didn't really find it too favorable for me personally. But I thought there was a lot more good than bad in the book, and yeah, I just kind of want to leave it at that. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.